Tess, rumor has it you've made vacation envy a real thing here in Whitefish.
Guilty as charged. At Outside Metro, we've got everything from cozy downtown lofts to Lakeview retreats, even barns with pickleball courts. And with over 500 five-star reviews, you really can't go wrong.
What? Okay, I'm already packing my bags.
Just make sure you book direct, Julie, and save on those booking fees at outsidemetro.com. That's where the good stuff happens.
Done. Outside Metro, and stay where the locals play. The IWD406 Podcast, where Montana women are heard, celebrated, and supported.
Today's guest is an emergency room physician who saw a critical gap between what people think they're prepared for in the outdoors and what actually shows up in the ER when things go wrong. Dr. Jeff and Dr. Mike are co-founders of PrepEM Wild and are on a mission to make real wilderness emergency preparedness accessible across the country, starting in the Northeast and expanding powerfully into the West. Their work was born not from theory, but from real-life emergency room cases involving hikers, hunters, anglers, backcountry skiers, adventurers, and families who never expected their quick outing to turn into a medical crisis. Montana is different. Our terrain is rugged. Our weather shifts fast. Our wilderness is vast. And our predator animals, they don't run from humans, they hunt them. PrepEM Wild was designed for places exactly like this. Today, we'll talk about PrepEM Wild, how it began, what they're seeing on the front lines of emergency medicine, the dangers people face, and how their survival kits, paired with real education, are changing the way people prepare for life outside cell service. Welcome, Dr. Jeff. How are you?
Thank you, Julie. I'm doing well. Thank you. A couple days off from the department. I'm happy to be relaxing and even happier to be having this conversation with you. So thank you for inviting me. Appreciate it.
I love that. Yeah, you're totally welcome. I want to get right into it.
Let's do it.
You're not from Montana. You're not from, but you want to be from Montana.
I do want to be from Montana. I have to blame my parents there. Yeah, right. I grew up outside of Philadelphia. It's called Westchester, Pennsylvania. Spent a lot of my life there and had a lot of my schooling in Philadelphia, including medical school and residency for emergency medicine. And I am currently in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, which is North Central. Some may have heard of it for the Little League World Series. But I will say, compared to where I grew up, which was suburbia, Williamsport is definitely the country. A lot of trails, a lot of hunting. I would say go to Montana, turn it up a little bit of a notch. There's no question about it. But many of the issues that we see in Williamsport, and we see where people are hunting, they're out trail running, they're out hiking, these are types of injuries and issues that we have noticed can be translated to anywhere in the country. In some places, again, kind of turn it up a notch like Montana.
Absolutely.
But yeah, grew up in the Northeast and in Pennsylvania, and in the near future will be out in Washington State. So I am moving past your direction, and there is always a possibility that I will back it up and end up in Montana at some point.
Well, you're not that far away. I mean, and Washington has Mount Rainier. There is a ton of hiking. You've got all the fishing going on up in that direction. Yeah.
Beautiful area.
Beautiful area. So you clearly were an outdoors kid.
Yes. My brother and I were always outside. I'll tell you, it's very interesting. So, growing up where I was, maybe a couple of other families had parents who went hunting, and they would sort of travel really to the middle of the state to do so. When I moved out to Williamsport, I would say 99% of the populace out there grew up hunting, grew up in the outdoors. Deer hunting is huge. Some of the biggest elk in the entire country are located in Pennsylvania. Yep.
Wow. I didn't know that.
There's a lottery for it, and I've yet to see anybody that's gotten it, but the elk are some of the biggest in the country.
Oh, sure.
And so there also are a lot of black bears in the area as well. So hunting is a way of life out there. I will say Mike, who is my business partner, also an emergency physician, and he and I saw the need for this company, PrepEM Wild. He grew up in that area. So it's interesting to have somebody who grew up with that as his background hunting, and somebody coming in almost as a transplant, having to get up to speed very quickly on, again, safety and some of the pitfalls that you can have when you're spending time in the outdoors. I will say a lot of people who go outdoors, maybe they did grow up doing that, and some of the basic safety fundamentals were ingrained in them as a child. But a lot of people today, certainly post-COVID, want to get outside. They want to go to the national parks. And many of them are not from locations where you can go out and go into a trail. Many of them are not from locations where people are out hunting. So, I think we bring two different perspectives from experience with the outdoors, learning a little bit later in life versus learning early in life, but also having that common foundation of emergency medicine as a career and seeing where these things come together and what we can do to help prevent some of the injuries, and if not prevent them, help them from getting worse. So that's kind of how we came together.
Okay, got you. Okay, that's why I was wondering, like, as an ER doctor, because I want to get into the birth of PrepEM Wild, but I want to back up just a little bit. You've been an ER doctor for how long?
It's been 10 years. 10 years
10
since
years.
the beginning of residency, which has gone by like this. Unbelievable.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
10
Yes.
years.
And so you guys have seen, an ER was where you probably did a lot of different things, but you landed in ER.
Yeah, the process through medical school is trying to figure out what you want to go into. Now, I'll be honest with you. I went to college down in Virginia. I graduated with a business degree. My mom was a nurse, always trying to encourage me to go into medicine. Like every defiant teenager, the answer was, I'm going to do something that you're not telling me to do. But I kind of had an idea 3/4 of the way through that I enjoyed business. I liked the idea of creating a business. However, my real passion was medicine. And that was after a study abroad that I had in Cape Town, South Africa, of all places. And so you see where there are no safety nets and people really are impoverished with potentially no help at all. And seeing that kind of changed my perspective on what career path I wanted to go into. And so I went back after that trip, took chemistry, enjoyed it, and then went to a program where you did all the pre-med courses and then went into medicine. So my path was not direct into medicine, but I was very happy that I ended up there. And then to answer your question, in medical school, you kind of have to decide what you want to do and what you like, and what they say in med school is, if you can't imagine life outside the operating room, do not become a surgeon. And so that's the big decision. Do you do medicine or do you do surgery? And for those of us who really enjoyed a little bit of everything, you like the fast-paced atmosphere, the work hard, play hard mentality where you're working shifts, you're working full-time, working really hard, and then as soon as you leave the hospital, you have time off, emergency medicine kind of fit right in. And so you're going to find a lot of individuals, a lot of physicians in emergency medicine or physician's assistants, even nurses and techs who work in emergency departments, kind of share that work hard, play hard. So a lot of us are going out trail running. A lot of us are going out hunting. A lot of us are going out and trying some extreme sports. I think once you get that adrenaline rush, you just love it. And so emergency medicine, for that reason, was a very good fit. And then enjoying the outdoors. Again, Mike kind of grew up in that area, but he also recruited me to work at Williamsport. And so that's how I met my business partner, Mike. And, over the course of years, Mike and I have become very, very good friends. And we continued to have conversations with each other. And that was, I'm seeing all these injuries. What are you carrying outside the hospital to protect yourself when you're going out hunting? And Mike would come up with a couple of things that he was carrying and he put together. And he asked, you're going out on these trail runs. What are you bringing out when you're running in the middle of the night with your dog? What are you bringing outside? So I had a couple items that I put in my pack, and we were just thinking to each other, it'd be kind of helpful because we see injuries all the time. We know how to treat many of these pathologies and many of these injuries and how to stabilize people. Why don't we come together and create something that we think is going to be most helpful for people when they go out? And we can also provide them some education on how to use these items.
Right.
So, this was years of us talking. I wish I could tell you there was like a eureka moment where we said, now's the time. We both kind of just continued to discuss it over and over. And then I think we both kind of looked at each other and we said, either we're going to do this or we're not going to do this. So why don't we do this? What's the risk? The worst thing that happens is we teach people how to use equipment, and, we can get that education out there, and so here we are.
I love it. I love it, Dr. Jeff. And the reason being is because you guys have, I'm assuming, throughout your careers and being in emergency medicine, you get your car accidents, where there are unfortunate situations, but oftentimes I'm assuming you both have seen where you're like, gosh, like what a dumb incident. Not necessarily dumb, but unfortunate incidents. But if they only would have been more prepared, right?
Yes. And the key to that is preparation. And I can go through just a good couple of examples. I'll back up and say this. When I was in high school, and I'll never forget this, one of my teachers was a history teacher, and he had written on the board the entire class, luck equals preparation plus opportunity. And, I just remember seeing it every single day I was in that class. And this guy had been in the Air Force before he was a history teacher, so took a lot from his aviation background. Very charismatic guy. I think there is a lot of truth to that, So when we're in the emergency department, a lot of times, oh, that person was lucky. Oh, that person was very unlucky. Well, listen. If you really boil this down to luck is preparation plus opportunity, preparation is 90% of this. There are some bad cases of bad luck. You run into a bear, you run into a bobcat, you run into a mountain lion where you are. I mean, as you mentioned, the the predators there are hunting you, they're not scared of you like most of them are on the East Coast. If you are prepared and you've thought about different scenarios ahead of time, you might save your life. And so a lot of times we'll see injuries coming in where somebody was outside on their farm, where we are in north central Pennsylvania. You might have your 85 or 90-year-old who's out on a side-by-side or a 4x4 fixing the fence of his farm at 6:30 at night in the winter when it's dark outside, and it gets flipped over. And something happens and this person is pinned under their four-wheeler, again, 85 or 90 years old, maybe on blood thinners, and they hit their head and they've lost consciousness. They haven't told anybody, their wife, where they are. They don't have a cell phone on them. They don't have any kind of a beacon on them. They don't have a first aid kit available, and so you ask yourself, okay, well, what could have been done to have prevented this? Maybe passing along information of where they were going to go so that their loved one knew to look out for them. We'll see individuals who are out driving. Car breaks down. It's cold outside on the side of the highway. Maybe they don't have service. Who are you going to call? What are you going to do if you get cold? Are you going to get out of your car and walk? Kind of thinking through some of these things ahead of time can potentially save your life. It seems like a relatively benign thing to go out for a drive. But when your car breaks down or you crash into a tree because of black ice or whatever it might be, what's your plan? What's your plan? And so a lot of the injuries that we see, motor vehicle accidents, someone maybe they've been a gun owner their entire lives and they are cleaning their handgun in their basement and the rest of the family is asleep. Maybe they're in the shed and they're cleaning the gun. We've all heard of this happening, and they didn't realize that there was a bullet in there, and they shoot themselves.
Yes.
And guess what? They have an arterial bleed. The arteries are coming from the heart. This is high pressure stuff. You have a limited amount of time before you lose all of your blood, and they don't have a tourniquet available. They don't have anything available, or they hit themselves in a way that they're incapacitated. You say to yourself, wow, how preventable was that injury? The answer is very. But I'll tell you, this is not your 18-year-old playing with a gun most of the time. This is a guy who's 65 or 70 years old, who has been around firearms his entire life, has made sure that the gun was empty when he was, most of the time, 99.999% of the time, but it's that 0.001% that can kill you, And so that's where, again, preparation, thinking about what you might do. You can't always control every factor. Mistakes are going to happen, but what do you have ready to go if something bad happens? Here's another example. Somebody's out on a trail run, and this is where Mike, being an avid hunter, a lot of times he'll go to Newfoundland and he's out in the wilderness in the middle of nowhere. Somebody gets lost. Somebody has no transponder on them. For whatever reason, they don't have their Garmin InReach or whatever GPS device.
Yeah.
Who are they going to contact? Let's say something does happen when you're out there and you call 911. How long is it going to take for EMS to get to you? And so what are your plans between when something bad happens and when the medics arrive? And so, you know, those first few minutes, sometimes the first couple hours, to be honest with you, if you're in the middle of nowhere, you're going to have to help the person next to you, or they're going to have to help you, or you're going to have to help yourself in order to save your life.
Right.
You know, and so the preparation aspect of all of this plays such a crucial role. And then once that opportunity arises, I mean, it's a bad opportunity when you shoot yourself in the arm. But if you want to be lucky, luck equals preparation from plus opportunity. If you want to be lucky, you're going to have to be prepared. And that's where this has stemmed from. There are so many people who have had such bad outcomes because they didn't know some of the basics. And I'm going to tell you, the basics are not difficult. I put out, you know, a 90-second video or a 2-minute video on just simply how to use a tourniquet. This is important. You know, the question was asked, well, is the best time to learn how to use an item when you are in the worst case scenario? No, absolutely not. I think we can all relate to somebody who has food allergies. Let's go with it. As a matter of fact, my wife is allergic to almost everything. Almost everything. And she developed these allergies, and she's also an emergency physician, and she developed these allergies when she was in high school. And so if you get somebody with peanut butter in a room, she works in an emergency department. If somebody has peanut butter on their beard, she's probably going to have an anaphylactic reaction, you know? And so the question is, luckily she's been through all of the training as a physician, but if you have a severe allergy to something, did you bring your EpiPen? Okay, well, that's first. You know, did you bring your Benadryl, your prednisone, your EpiPen? Did you bring any of that stuff? Is the first time you're going to use an EpiPen when you have an anaphylactic reaction? I mean, you're already worried. Maybe you're having difficulty breathing, you know? So the first time to practice that would be with the dummy that they have over at the pharmacy so that you know exactly what you have to do. And or training the patients around, the people around you to know what to do if something bad happens, you know? And this is the nature of the training that those of us in the medical field have, specifically emergency medicine and residency, is everything seems profoundly overwhelming when it's happening. And everything seems like it's moving very quickly when you first see it. But the more you see it and the more you practice, it becomes muscle memory. And that's where that preparation comes in. How do you handle the bad scenarios? How do you handle the bad ones? Oh, go ahead.
No, I want to interject and just say, couple things. Number one is it's really interesting I do a lot of foreshadowing when I interview people, and I see where that teacher influenced the mindset of being prepared. That's the first thing I want to point out. But the second thing is how relatable this conversation is and these case scenarios that you're explaining. But here's the thing that people don't think about, right? As Montanans, we have to kind of be prepared. Like, for example, I know of Montana women and even men. They're like, well, I'm a hunter. I need to haul the first aid kit, but I'm going to put it in the back of the truck. I'm not going to carry it with me. So if in the event I'm out in the woods, something happens, I can go back to the truck and get it, right? So some people do think, I mean, especially with where we live, that you do have to have some sense of preparation, you know, having something with you. But the point that you've made to me is we don't necessarily have it on us. You know, we don't necessarily have those things that we're carrying with us, because if we do go for a hike, it's usually a couple hours and we have to carry our food. We have to carry water. We have to carry other things that we want, maybe our cameras, because we're busy wanting to take pictures. So the thought of having it right with us is not necessarily a thing. We think, oh, we're prepared. We've got it in the car, right?
Correct. And
you know, and the second thing I want to make, and I want to address this one is, you know, I think a lot of people there's nurses out there that know what to do in the event of an emergency. A doctor has some wherewithal in regards to, oh, that's a massive bleed. It's over the artery, like all those kind of things. But somebody like me, who's not a nurse, right, would know what to do with a kit, would not know how to address the situation. And let's not take into consideration the emotional upheaval that we're feeling, the panic, if it's something's happening to our kid, right?
Blind you. Yep.
Absolutely. So you hit some really good points to consider and to be mindful of on really not number one, have something on you at all times.
100%.
But number 2, know how to use the kit. And I think that's a distinctive.
As important.
Yes, it's distinctive for PrepEM Wild kits. And we're going to get into that. We're going to look at the kit. But be able to be educated on know how to use the tool, right?
Very important.
Have something and not know how to use it.
Correct. And it does happen. Look, when Mike and I were deciding how best to approach outdoor education and sort of the first aid aspects of this, we considered many different ways to pursue it. Do you just make videos online and teach people how to use things? For us, our goal is, let's create a business based on something that we're already using. Because if we as ER docs are figuring out what we need to bring out into the wilderness, and again, we come at it from 2 different perspectives. Mike is usually out hunting and I'm out trail running, and we're finding that many of the items that we have, I would say 99% of them are the same. It's like, okay, wait, there's something to this here. So, what we did was we figured, okay, I think what we can do is we can make a first aid kit and let's see what's out there. And so we took a look and saw all of the different kits that were out there. There are a myriad of them. Some carry X, Y, and Z. Some carry everything you've ever seen at a pharmacy in a backpack. And so we said to ourselves, okay, well, are you likely to carry a 400-pound bag with every single item you've ever heard of or never even seen before? And when you have an emergency, you open it up and you got 4,000 items flying out of it. That's overwhelming. It makes your life more difficult. Instead of being helpful, it is detrimental to the situation. And so we said, okay, let's boil this down into what we think is most important and the quality that's there that we can trust. And so what we did was we came up with our Essentials Pro Kit. It is small, although it's taking up the whole screen. It is small. It's something that can be carried easily when you're hunting. It's something that can be carried when you're out trail running. I was just out for a trail run yesterday. I keep it in my bag. It is
Can you show us that? Let's show the kit and show us how it can be used. And for those listening, you can go see these videos on YouTube and on our YouTube channel on, he's demonstrating what the kit looks like. So yes, go ahead.
So you can see it's about palm size. It's not very big. There's the side of it. You open it up and you have what we deem to be the most essential components, hence the name Essentials Kit.
Yeah. And just for those listening in, the kit probably about, I'd say 6 to 8. Would you say 6 to 8 inches wide and maybe 4
inches thick? Yeah. 3 to
4
4
inches thick. And it's very compact. It's a compacted type back. It looks like a backpack.
It is. And it's very compact, but it also is very light as well.
Right.
When you're going out for a trail run or you're going out for a hunt, the last thing you want is more weight in your actual kit.
Yeah. And for those listening, this is probably, how much does this weigh to carry it?
I'll have to double check the exact weight for you.
It can't even be a pound.
It's
so
less
light.
than a pound. It is less than a pound. And it has what we deemed, again, to be the most essential components that one could possibly use outdoors. So you have in there, just to kind of list off a couple things, you have a tourniquet, and that's made by a company that we chose called Snake Staff. It is slightly smaller than what your typical tourniquet is, which is called a cat tourniquet. It's a little bit smaller. And the reason that we chose that was we wanted a tourniquet that could be used on both children as well as animals such as dogs. A lot of people are outside hiking. I go outside trail running. I have a 115-pound German Shepherd. He's a big boy. But if something happens to him and he breaks a limb, or he has a really bad laceration, what are we going to do? Are you going to have a separate kit for a dog, or are you going to make sure that you have a kit that you could use for both children and animals? And so, if there's a bad laceration with a bad bleed, this is something that could still work on the dog. If it happens to your child, maybe they're 6 years old, 8 years old, 10 years old. What I'm recognizing in North Central Pennsylvania, and even more so in Montana, is people become well aware of the hunting tradition at a very early age, and it's a very important part of life, learning where your food comes from, learning how to go out and hunt. And this is typically a parent-child relationship that is built at an early age. And so if you go out and something happens to your child, it's great if you have a kit that works just for you. Great. But what happens when it's your kit? What happens when it's your animal?
Well, and I want to stop you right there and say it's super important. I think, during hunter safety programs, like my kids and my daughter, she's a bow hunter, and my boys are also bow and rifle. She just prefers bow. But during the hunter safety programs, I think something like this to show them on how to use a tourniquet would be so
Very
valuable.
Important.
Yes.
Agreed.
Yes.
100%. And that's what it comes down to. So, you mentioned injuries with bows. I mean, look, gunshot wounds we do see. We see them quite often. They can be catastrophic. Some people have gotten, and we keep using the word, lucky, and maybe it didn't hit an artery, it didn't hit a bone, it didn't hit anything major. But we also see some of these wounds from the bows. I mean, and I'm going to tell you something, crossbows today, and just how great the technology is. You have people hitting animals at 150 yards away, and it's traveling almost as fast as a bullet. But guess what? Those broadheads are this big in diameter. And by design, they shred the tissue, And so when you're talking about a bad wound, gunshot wounds are bad, but some of the worst ones we've ever seen are from bows, And this could be as easy as child picks up crossbow and accidentally lets it go. Maybe it hits them, maybe it hits a parent, or, something happens and you drop it out of a tree stand and the thing goes off. Sometimes people don't put safeties on their guns. They don't put, again, whole host of reasons that when you look back, you say that was totally preventable. But the question is, what are you going to do when it happens? Because it's not something that you're anticipating, but you should be prepared for. And so, the tourniquet is a great solution if you hit an extremity and you have a bad bleed. That is then able, to go ahead and block that off and stop the bleed, giving you time to get to a hospital. We chose another item in there that we have that we really liked is called wound clot. Again, the beauty of creating a company is we can pick and choose whichever products we like the best, and so we looked at quite a few different items, and wound clot really stood out because you go ahead and put this directly on a wound and it becomes part of the clot. We're going to keep this simple. If it's bleeding, you're going to want to put pressure on it. If the pressure doesn't stop it, you're going to put a tourniquet, but the wound clot will essentially help to turn whatever's bleeding into a clot. And we were very, very impressed with what we saw. And so we included that in our kit.
Can I ask you, is this a surface one, or can this clot deeper penetrate?
You can push that as deep as you can get it.
Wow. That itself is pretty remarkable. That type of technology.
We've been very, very happy with that product, and we've talked to the manufacturers about it, and we think that based on what we've been seeing, we've been really excited about that as part of a kit, and something we would certainly want to use ourselves if faced with a life-threatening injury or bleed. Here's what it comes down to. There's always some trepidation about maybe doing too much when you have a bad injury like that. Somebody's bleeding out. Look, whatever you do, typically speaking, is going to be better than nothing. If they have a wound in their neck, I would not advise that you put a tourniquet on somebody's neck. That seems like a no-brainer, but let's just be clear about that.
Well, and the one thing too to really point out, and this really will resonate with a lot of people that live in Montana. If you're in a situation like that where you have an internal bleeding situation or a very obvious bleed you're going to bleed out, you're going to pass out, all things.
Yep.
Even if let's say you are more local. Let's say you're, in the Northwest area. There are not a lot of police enforcers. Like those that have listened to Jeannie Parker's episode, there are not a lot of, it takes them time to get to you. I mean, we're not close. Our cities are not close. It's a lot of winding roads. So these police officers or emergency dispatch, it can be anywhere to 45 minutes to 2 hours to get to you.
Yep.
So having something available like this that has the technology inside of it that can help, is it basically initiating like coagulation? Is that what it
Yes. Basically
Okay.
what it's doing is any of the blood that it comes in contact with, it is going to go ahead and clot. And so the
okay.
goal is to stop that bleeding. Now, what else can create clot? Pressure, and so when we talk about stop the bleed, put pressure on the wound. If you need to go ahead and put any kind of gauze or anything into the wound to get it to stop, you do whatever you can to get pressure on it. The goal is to mitigate the blood loss, and then you can get that person to the hospital for definitive care. Again, you are in Montana, and for your audience of especially women in Montana, you guys are really out there. I mean, listen, I was out in Whitefish, which is where you are, and it is so pretty, but all you have to do is drive 10 minutes in one direction and there might be nobody, what I mean? Certainly if you're going hunting and you're probably out several hours, everything that I mentioned that occurs in north central Pennsylvania, that is amplified where you are in Montana, simply because of the amount of space available and the lesser number of people in that area.
Well, and we have a very big adventure group of women. They do trail cutting, so there's a lot of like injuries that can happen with cutting trails. I mean, there's a lot of outdoor adventure groups here, and they could be mountain bikers. They can be, beginner hikers all the way to those that want to climb summits,
And that's a very good point.
Yes.
It's a very good point, is the type of person who has made it to Montana in many cases, again, we're generalizing here, but in many cases is that outdoor person who's, listen, if they're not from the area, they already are willing to take a risk and move out there. So you might have somebody who's a little bit more of a risk taker, probably somebody who's A-type personality, and they want to learn new things and they're going to do it 100%. You mentioned mountain biking. That's huge, because guess what? When you're on a mountain bike, you're on a mountain and you're going down fast. And for those adventurers, they're breaking bones, and when you break a bone, guess what? You could also have an open fracture with a bleed. One of the things that we added in our kits is a splint, and splints are very important and very helpful to use when you have an injury to a bone. And that helps to keep it in position, which helps to mitigate pain. And so if you can do that while you're halfway up the mountain, then you might be able to get down alive.
Absolutely.
So,
well, and I also want to say this, because you're getting me to think, we are heavily inundated with tourists, right? So there's a lot of
I was
times.
one of them.
You're the one. Yes. So a lot of times you'll get tourists that are absolutely not prepared. But for like myself, I'm going out with my kids. I'm a local. I know where the fun hiking spots are, but I'll run across a tourist that's not from here. They're from overseas. They're from a metropolitan area. This is a big deal for them to be out in the wilderness, in the woods. It's an everyday hike for us, but they often come with a lot of unpreparedness. So being a person that's always kind of watching the people that are around me and the people that I pass, to have something like that ready in case something happens to our tourist.
Very much so.
Super valuable. I mean,
Very
we're
much
always looking
so.
to help. Montanans love to help.
And you guys are a hardy group, I can remember I did a rotation in Big Sky, Montana. And when we went down to the local restaurant, I'll never forget some of the guys who are farmers with the long leather trench coat. And you can just look and this person does not complain about anything at all, And so the sort of person who gets themselves to Montana oftentimes is that kind of adventurous individual who probably has been well prepared. And again, with the advent of all these tourists, again, Glacier National Park, I was there on, what's that main trail that basically has cliffs right next to it?
Oh, it's Avalanche.
Yep.
We talking about Avalanche, or no, you're talking about Highline. That is a
Highline Trail. So
Highline Trail.
Highline
Yes.
Trail was definitely the highlight of my trip. But, we got there early in the morning. I've never seen anything like it. You talk about weather changing quickly in places, and Montana, again, takes that up a notch. In the Northeast, all right, maybe there's some very small squall that comes through when you're running. Okay, a little bit of snow. This was in the middle of summer. We got up to the top of the mountain. It's dark outside. We're in the middle of a cloud or fog or some combination. And we're like, all right, well, it's starting to get a little bit light outside. We got a parking spot, which is hard enough to get in the morning. That's why we got there so early. Let's start our walk. It went from below freezing to 80 degrees in about an hour and a half. As soon as you walked past a very specific area of a Highline Trail, it looked like a waterfall of clouds coming down, and then it was gone. I've never seen anything like that. But it begs the question, are you prepared if you're out hiking all day and then that hits you in the afternoon? Are you going to have the right number of layers with you? Are you prepared for that? For somebody like myself, I lucked out in that, I keep a first aid kit on me and I had a jacket on, but I'll tell you, if I had been stuck out there with how cold that was and I couldn't move, it would have been a problem. It would have been a real problem. And then not only an hour later was it hot enough to have short sleeve shirt and shorts and you're sweating. It's the weather out there. It's
well, the variables.
So much, and you have to know what you're getting yourself into. Again, it's not knowing what you don't know can get you very, very injured. And so, as somebody who lives in Montana and goes out hiking, having a kit, you might be well prepared for yourself, but you didn't think about the fact that you might be prepared to save somebody else's life. I think it was only maybe a month or two ago, somebody fell off that trail. Now, that is probably not a recoverable injury, but look, there are 10-foot cliffs that might be, depending on how that person is injured. They fall on their arm. They may not even fall off a cliff. You get somebody who is 65, 70 years old. There's an injury called a foot injury, fall on outstretched hand, and it's usually a distal radius fracture, a wrist fracture, that is very, very painful. And you might be 5 miles away from your car or more, and you don't have a splint. What are you going to do? You're going to have to hold it. You can't make yourself a sling because you didn't bring anything, So these things are basic, Well,
and I want to go back to what you said. I don't mean to interrupt, but I want to say this, Dr. Jeff, is, a couple things. You said the variables with weather, right?
Yes.
So knowing that oftentimes people are not prepared with the incremental weather changes.
Correct.
We can go from, like you said, storms, cloud coverage to blazing, and people don't bring their sunscreen.
Correct.
Or they get sunburn really bad, or they get stuck and they're on a trail and it's hours of being underneath the blazing, sun that we can get here. You have these options of, it looks like dry burn dressing or like sunburns, and then you have an emergency blanket to wrap somebody up in. This is fantastic.
So the goal was, again, let's boil down our kit, because if we make it too big, number one, we don't want a kit that's going to be profoundly expensive, that's going to price people out. All right, you can get a $400 or $500 kit, but most people aren't going to spend that money. They're going to say, well, what are the odds that something bad happens? So, we pared it down, but also chose the best quality materials at a price point that would work for most people. And so you mentioned in there, we have the dry burn dressing. That's excellent if you have any kind of a burn. You could use it for a very bad sunburn. You could also use it if, let's say, you're out camping and you burn yourself. What are you going to do? If you're on a very expensive hunt, let's face it, people spend tens of thousands of dollars on hunts, and you burn yourself and you have nothing to help. Are you going to give up that 2-week hunt because you got the burn? Well, listen, maybe based on the burn, you can go ahead and treat it and you can keep going on about your business, and, you're going to be just fine. But, again, worst case scenarios, you're in the middle of the wilderness, in the middle of the night, you're super cold, you didn't bring anything with you. The emergency blanket, very lightweight, very easy to carry, something that could save your life. You're in your car. You break down in the middle of a road in Montana. I think I was driving between Bozeman and Livingston, and you're going over a pass. I mean, that pass, from what I understand, can shut down at any given time. What happens if your car breaks down? What are you going to do? You know?
Yeah. Well, that's important because, up in the North Fork area, and those listening, and they know where that is, up in the northwest part of Montana, kind of wedged near the Canadian border and Glacier National Park and the National Forest. Oftentimes people get stranded. There was a case that happened not too long ago where a dad and his 12-year-old son went out to track a moose. So they were hunting a moose. They got the moose, and then they went back out not thinking. And right now in Montana, it starts getting dark very early on in the afternoon. And, when you're out in the lodge poles and you really can't see northwest, east, you're kind of discombobulated. And I think they got stuck in a little bit of a bog area where they were starting to get hypothermia, essentially, because they were waist up in water that hasn't quite frozen solid yet. So having something like this where, the little boy ended up getting a little bit of hypothermia from it, and having a blanket, having the ability to, wrap him up or use something to help keep him warm would be super awesome to have. And, I know that there wasn't really necessarily any wounds, but to have something like this readily available, because to get search and rescue up there is a difficult task.
It's going to take time. And
it's going to take time.
This 12-year-old, look, we've all seen 12-year-olds that weigh 180 pounds. You know what I mean? And so you might have a 12-year-old that looks like they're 16. And this person, you're thinking to yourself, well, maybe any good parent would just carry their kid out of there Rambo style. Well, look, maybe you can't carry this person, or maybe you're injured and you can't carry that person. So now you are really reliant upon somebody else to come and rescue you, and cold and wet is the worst combination, because anytime you're wet, it's going to pull that heat directly off your skin and out of your body. And that's when you really become hypothermic the most, So if you can take off the wet clothes, again, well, why do I need a blanket? I'm wearing a jacket. Well, what happens if your jacket gets completely saturated in cold water? Okay, well, now maybe that jacket is causing you more harm than good, or maybe your underwear is causing you more harm than good. So getting wrapped up in an emergency blanket like that, perhaps with the father or something, trying to keep each other warm, can be very helpful, So it's a simple thing that is not an expensive item that can save your life. And again, it's preparation, thinking about what could happen and then acting on that. Because if something happens and you haven't thought about it ahead of time, you're going to run into a world of hurt. And this is where a lot of emergency medicine, which many of the protocols that we follow, you do over and over again. And so when something bad happens, you've thought about an algorithm for somebody with chest pain or abdominal pain, and you're going down your algorithm. You've seen it X number of times, and so you don't have to think about it, And so when something catastrophic happens, you're also thinking about all the possibilities that you could go through, I will say, as an ER doc, sick babies, sick kids, cardiac arrests in kids are always traumatic to all of us, because they don't happen often, and anyone or anything that has innocence to it, that has something bad happen, gets you worked up emotionally. And so the question is, what do you do when it's a situation like that, and how do you work your way through it? You asked a very good question, like, how do you handle things when the adrenaline's going and you're worrying about everything? Well,
yes,
that's what training is for, is to think through your algorithms of, I'm an ER doc. These are the tools that I have. This is what I can do. Okay, so I'm going to do everything that I can do, and I've done it before, and I've mentally prepared. And if X, Y, and Z doesn't work, what are the other options that I have that could maybe turn this case around? We like to think about intubations and what your process is for putting a tube down somebody's throat to breathe for them. Listen, most intubations are pretty easy, but the ones that aren't are catastrophic. Everything's great until it's not. But again, it's going through in your mind what your training was and what your preparation was ahead of time. What tools do you have available to you to get the job done. And remember, the tools, we're providing the essential tools that we think can be very helpful in an outdoor scenario, truthfully, or indoor if you cut yourself with a knife, but anything that could occur, we're providing tools. But if you don't know what tools you have and you don't know how to use the tools, you might as well not even have them,
Well, and I want to point something out. You made a good point. When we do, as women, some of us are better than others, and men as well, where we are in an emergency situation. Preparation is number one, and number two is just organizing, like getting
100%.
yourself organized. And I want to show this for those that are watching the video. The organization of the kit is so put in such compartmentalization where it's easy to access it. You can see exactly what it is. For those that are listening, inside of the packet, they have these straps that house each individual tool within the tool kit. And it's very bold lettering, so you can read what it is. Also, the instructions on the back side, sometimes we kind of get into a panic mode and forget our preparation, our videos that wait a minute, I watched that video. Wait, what do I need to do with this? How do I address the wound? So, but on the compressed wound little kit that comes inside of it,
the compressed gauze,
it has instructions that are so easy to read. Now, for those people that understand like a classic first aid kit, right? You open it up and it's the writing is so tiny, you can barely read it. There's Band-Aids everywhere, or, gauze and Band-Aids popping out everywhere. This is very compartmentalized. If you're a person that gets panicky, that needs organization, this is a beautifully orchestrated, created kit that makes it so simple to not really have to think too hard.
I appreciate that. And
yes.
And that's exactly the goal, is to have exactly what you need in a way that's presented to you. And look, I would say for anybody who has a first aid kit, certainly, we have ours and we're very proud of it and we like the items that are in there. Whatever you have, the goal is know what you have available and know how to use it. If you had a kit that you've had at your house forever and you're not in the market for one, okay, listen, that's perfectly fine. The most important thing is that you keep yourself safe. And if something happens and I'm out there and I get hurt, I would love for you to have the knowledge to be able to help me if I can't help myself. That's really what it comes down to. Our solution was one that we saw a demand for after friends, family all asked us. And I'll still tell you, I asked my mom, what first aid kit do you have in the house? Oh, I don't know. I got this thing over here in the closet. I open it up. There's 4,000 Band-Aids, or, well, I got this at this store and they said it had 400 items in it. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, what items does it have in it? Oh, I don't know, Jeff. I don't know. I'm not going to have to use this. And again, I'm an ER doc and this is my family and my mom is a nurse and she knows what she's doing. So sorry to put you on the spot, Mom. And I am going to pass this along to her. So I'm very sorry. But she got me into medicine. So I couldn't be happier. Anyway.
Right. But the majority of us are not in the medical field. And it definitely is important to be prepared, but also be organized and have, you've made so many great points, Dr. Jeff, about, just about preparation and organization, but also, it's something that you don't want to necessarily ever have to use.
Correct.
But, if you are in an event, you're in an emergency situation, you're thinking, my God, thank God I had this thing ready,
yes.
To use and to help save somebody's life.
Exactly. And, the biggest things is just think about what you do on a daily basis and where you go. Okay, most people are driving their car to work. Okay, well, guess what? Mike and I each have one in each of our vehicles, because if we're going on vacation, as my wife and I are right now, I'm sitting in Toronto, I have one in the car. I also have one that I keep in my bag. So I have it here if something happens in the hotel. I take it when I'm out running. It is a very lightweight bag. And that's kind of the goal of it, is to be unintrusive and there when you need it. If you have a first aid kit at your home and you go on vacation, it doesn't really do you any good, and if you have it in your car and you're in Montana, where these trails are nothing to mess with and people do die, are you going to bring it with you? If it's some massive backpack thing, you're probably not going to bring it with you. If you don't know what's in it, and so you don't really know what you're going to do with it, you're less likely to bring it because you're scared of it, you know? And so, you know, familiarize yourself with these things. You can become a professional at any one of the items in there in less than 30 minutes to an hour. You know, you will be proficient enough to get yourself through some bad circumstances, you know?
Right.
They're not hard. None of this stuff is difficult to use.
Yeah, you don't have to be a trained physician to be able
Not at all.
to figure
Not
out
at
how
all.
to use this kit.
And most people who are out walking are not trained physicians, you know, and, you know, they're all sometimes people get lucky. You have your combat medic who's out there, or you have your paramedic, or you have your nurse, or you have a physician. But look, depending on the circles that you're hanging out in, if you go with a group of friends and nobody has any idea what they're doing, that's scary, you know, and that Highline Trail is one of them. You know, this is non-kit related, but I asked my wife, who is an avid runner, you know, and again, an ER doc, you know, what is the biggest safety concern that you face as a woman? Look, I think we can all agree there are some serious predators in Montana. There are bears, there are mountain lions out there. There are everything you could imagine that can attack you is going to be located in there. But you know what the worst predator is?
What?
Human.
Oh, I know. I knew you were going to say it. It's true.
But it's true. You know, I take it for granted. I go out for runs at night and I have no concern. But, you know, this is something that is not in our kit, but I do think is something for women to consider. Again, you know, we put together what we thought was going to be a great kit for people to use, but our real intention is education and having fun with that, but making sure people are aware of what's out there to be prepared. You know, bear spray when you're out where you are is more common that people take with them, you know, and if somebody's going to attack you, a person is going to attack you, especially as a woman. It's something that men don't see as much. It's a real concern for women is the predator, you know, the human predator coming at them. And, you know, something like mace or bear spray, you know, again, if you're already carrying bear spray, that's something to consider, or training for some kind of defense, you know, in some areas where your laws allow it, you know, firearms are legal to have to defend yourself, you know, but
and the thing about that is
for women, it's a real concern.
And the thing about that is we had interviewed Annah Pharr from Firearms Handling, and she really stressed this. You don't want to be a liability to yourself or to others with anything you do, you know, to be prepared. Gun handling, you need to know how to use the tool that you're working with, right? So that is the number one thing. But the other thing is the evolution of this kit. I mean, there's so many ways that this kit can go, you know, and I want to say this I want to go back to what the kit can do. Number one, it's chock full of really great things, and it's easy to access. It's organized. But I also want to say that it's not hard. I mean, they have amazing straps attached to it where it's easy to attach to your physical body. I mean, it's a no-brainer that if you are concerned that you're not going to be able to fit this into a backpack, this can be easily attached to a belt, to the back of a back. You know, you're not going to have to physically hold it or carry it. You want it accessible. For people that are rafters, they like to go out and, you know, raft. You can easily attach this to your PFD. It's not really a hard thing to say, no, I can't carry that, you know?
And that was our goal, you know, keep it unobtrusive and small. You know, we have a great customer who is in law enforcement. She's a sheriff and she carries this on her belt, you know, and we have some first responders who are carrying these on their belts. We have some people who, and I'll show you, you know, it has a buckle at the front. You can unbuckle it, but then there's also Velcro that you can pull off. So if you had Molly on the back of your, like some people do, back of your seat in your car, or you have a panel or something like that, you could attach this and immediately have this available. You could do the same thing if you have a side-by-side, a bike. It gives a great opportunity for you to then connect that to keep it with you. Again, the goal here is to have something that's there when you need it. And the hope is you never have to use it, but you know how to use it when it's there. It's unobtrusive. It's not weighing you down. And it's a no-brainer when you're throwing stuff in your bag and you're like, I'm already carrying 100 and something pounds for this really, really long trek I'm going on. Or think about this. For people who are going elk hunting, moose hunting, bear hunting, how much do those weigh when you get one? Right? So even when you go out on these expeditions, you may only have a fraction of what you're planning to bring back with you. So again, every ounce counts when it comes to this stuff. And so, yeah, you could go out, you could buy every single item you can find at Walmart, or you could buy a big backpack that's a first aid kit. But it's going to be the first thing you leave behind because it weighs so much.
Right.
Again, you don't want to have to second guess, well, I'm going out for a trail run. I don't want to bring my first aid kit because it's going to be uncomfortable. It fits in my Solomon bag, my running bag. It's not.
Well, and I want to say this. I mean, for those that are listening, these are designed by ER physicians. They have seen the worst of the worst, injuries and wounds. So they strategically figured out these are kind of the core things that you need because they've seen it and they've done their research on it, right?
Yep.
So I look at that and I think, okay, what else really? What's the evolution of these PrepEM wild kits? Where do you see this going?
Good question. We have a couple other items that are currently in the works to look out for. So we sell the Essentials kit. The one that you're showing is the Essentials Pro, and the difference is we provide the tourniquet and we provide the wound clot. So we got a tourniquet and we got the wound clot in that bag. The Essentials kit does not have those for some people who maybe have different items that they've already had at home. Again, the goal here is to provide you with the most comprehensive kit that you need. If you already have some of those items and you want to provide your own tourniquet in there, absolutely. The cat tourniquets will fit in that bag. So feel free to put it in there if you want the Essentials kit. The evolution of this is as follows. Kind of like medicine, you kind of like start building on. As you learn to do A, you get to B, C, D. You kind of get a little sexier, a little bit more specific techniques to learn. And nothing in this, as I mentioned before, is a hard item to learn how to use whatsoever. Watch a lot of our Instagram videos. We're going to continue to be coming out with more content that's more specific to how to use each individual part of it. The next bag is going to be a hemorrhage kit. It is in the works. I will keep you updated with that one, but we are very, very excited. That will be a kit that has a little bit more in it for those who are interested in having a little bit more training to use them for perhaps some chest wounds and some needle decompression. And so we have a good group of items that will be in that kit, and that's going to be coming out in the next several months. So we're looking forward to it. And that's the fun of this is, Mike and I make all the decisions with this. We're both ER docs, and we both are passionate about education, and we're passionate about safety, and we're passionate about preparation. And again, we come from different worlds of the outdoors that really do come together very, very well, and both with a fundamental knowledge. And our hope is that knowledge will be translated into something that can save your life or somebody that you love.
Perfect. I love that. I mean, and I have just a few more questions, but the first one is just now that you're kind of in this business and in this world, I am sure it's been an eye-opener for you to see, like, what are the new trends coming with
Big
preparation?
Time.
I mean, it's kind of exciting.
It is. I think as social media, which is already as big as it is, continues to get even bigger and even more immersive. I mean, look at all of the different platforms that are out there. They all kind of connect, So I see information being shared much quicker today than it ever was in the past. Perhaps some procedures that people can do after watching YouTube, they're more likely to do some of those things, And so I think the information is out there. I think a twofold answer to your question. The information is readily available now for people to learn. And so you have many different sources that you can go to. So with that creates competition and challenges with that. Our goal is we can provide information in a way that's understandable and relatable. And based on our experience, we can do it in a way that tends to resonate best with people. In the emergency department, my job in many ways is to educate you on what I am looking for based on your symptoms. I think I'll give a good example. Somebody comes into the emergency department with chest pain. I have what's called my differential diagnosis, which are all the things that it could be. Could be, acute coronary syndrome or a heart attack, a pneumothorax, a pneumonia. Maybe there's a musculoskeletal component. Maybe it's a pulmonary embolism. Maybe it's an aortic dissection. I'm listing these things off, but that's what we do. And then I'm going to order tests to kind of check the boxes off and say, okay, you don't have this, you don't have this, you don't have this, you don't have this. Okay, that's great. Now, if I go into the room and I tell you, all right, Julie, everything looks good. I'm washing my hands of this. You're fine. Go home. You're going to sit there and go, well, what the heck did you even do? So much of our job is education, and most people who come in, many people, maybe not most, but many people are very ignorant to what their symptoms could mean or what we were looking for. And so it's important to us to educate you on exactly what we're doing and exactly what we're looking for in a way that you understand. And so I think that this career has really translated very well into education, and on a platform like Instagram or on a podcast like yours that have a lot of followers who are really hungry for information and people that they can trust to give it to them, and so we've spent all of these years and continue to see all of these patients. Why not educate you on what it is that we're seeing so that maybe one day you can save my life if I'm not in a position to help myself, and what we're doing, it may seem like it's imposing, it may seem very difficult and that we're going over all these things, but we like to keep it basic. We're emergency physicians, we know what we don't know and we know what our limitations are, but airway, breathing, circulation are some basic things. I would say as homework for any listener, take a CPR course, take a stop the bleed. These are not hard to learn. And, speaking of CPR, I can't tell you how many times, especially in movies, and a lot of times we learn what we're going to do in a movie, you see chest compressions, and the chest compression is like pushing this far down on the chest, and it doesn't even look like the person has any discomfort. I mean, presumably you're doing compressions, the person is unconscious, hence them requiring compressions. But, it doesn't look like if you were to do that to me, I'd be in any pain. Well, guess what? Real compressions, you're breaking ribs and you're breaking the sternum. And that's just the nature of it. If you are not doing that, you're probably not pushing hard enough. Your goal is to compress the heart to start that blood flow, try and perfuse the brain, and so that is just one simple example. And somebody can save so many lives if they know that. But if you've never done it or you've never had instruction on how to do it, guess what? If that person collapses in front of you on a trail run, as has occurred, what's your plan? And that person is now 5 miles into a trail, cardiac arrest, getting chest compressions or not. You have a lot of time between you and the medics coming. So very simple thing, stop the bleed. Very good course to take. I think this is great education for anybody, and then you kind of take your education from there as you get more comfortable, and if you've had CPR training and you've had stop the bleed and you know how to use a tourniquet, you can use any component in our kit. Not a problem at all.
Yes,
not a problem. And our goal is to try and give you a basic understanding that we think you would need in an emergency situation. That's what it
right. And so I want to say this, wrapping back into what you were saying, the education component is critical. And where do people go to learn about the kits? Also to learn how to use the kits?
Absolutely.
Do you have a YouTube channel?
YouTube channel is coming.
It's coming,
Instagram, yes. And that's where a lot of the education has started,
So Instagram is the platform. And then do you actually go directly into your communities and talk and do educational type workshops? Or
yeah, so we've actually spoken to some local schools, and our plan is to continue to do that even more. Here's a good example. My paternal grandfather had a heart attack when he was in his early 40s. And my dad was in class, as he tells the story. He was in class learning about signs and symptoms of a heart attack just the day before it happened. And I think he was at dinner. He had some nausea. He's starting to sweat. And my dad was like, I think I heard something about that. That looks like a heart attack. And sure enough, it was. Immediately got a cabbage at the time. This was years ago before even stents, and, had a procedure done and it saved his life, So something as simple as that, that's what we're coming out with, So Mike and I, again, we work as full-time emergency physicians. And so we're coming out with these at a very good pace, and our goal is to continue that. So really what I would always ask the listeners and anyone who's following us on Instagram, the PrepEM Wild, and we have prepemwild.com, throw some questions to us, email us, because if you have a question, I guarantee you there's 10,000 or 100,000 other people out there who have the same question. Do not be afraid. There are no dumb questions when it comes to this stuff. Somebody else is thinking the exact same thing and is afraid to ask. Always.
Absolutely. Yes. So I'm going to challenge our listeners to write in. You can email us. You can email PrepEM Wild. Get those questions asked, and we'll make sure to answer them for sure.
Love it.
I want to wrap up. I just want to say, Dr. Jeff, I can see you being in Montana. You guys as kits being all over Montana. I can see it being a staple in vehicles being sold at dealerships across the U.S., because I think it's super important that, collaboration, partnerships, and saying, you know what,
100%.
we're driving these tools, essentially, these cars, these big, massive SUVs. Why not have some toolkits inside the vehicle in the event of something that happens? So I can see PrepEM Wild being everywhere. This is exciting for you guys. Huge. But I also think that it's so important to get it into Montana, get it into outfitters' hands, get it into these large outdoor companies.
100%.
Letting people know that it's important to be prepared and have one of these readily available. And they're super easy to manage. They're super easy to handle, and they're beautifully put together. And
Thank you.
You guys have done a fantastic job.
It took a while. It did take a while. And,
right.
Too many iterations to even begin to talk about, but we're very proud of where it's ended up and continue to be proud of some of the new items that we have coming along. I think everybody's really, really going to enjoy it, and a lot of the items in first aid kits, look, you're not reusing wound clot. Believe it or not, the tourniquets, every tourniquet company will tell you it's rated to be used once, in the case of an emergency. Truth be told, if it's saturated in blood, you're probably not going to want to use it again for obvious reasons. So we also have a refill kit that's going to be dropping in the near future, and that's going to have basically a refill of all the items minus the bag itself. So our goal is to try and create a system where you're not overpaying for something that you don't need. You're getting exactly what you want when you need it. And so, continue to give us feedback. We're asking all of our customers to do that. We've had lots of positive feedback, and we've had, yourself included, some really good ideas on really how to use this. Because remember, again, I've said it before, know what you don't know. I don't live in Montana, and I'm not a professional raftsman, And so for somebody who does that often, they know what they need the most in there, and something like a kit that works very well that might be waterproof. I think we're on to something there, and I love that idea,
I love that.
Again, Mike and I can make whatever we want, and that is, if there's a demand that's going to help people and keep them safe, nothing is more fun to us and satisfying than seeing somebody have the kit and using it in a way that it's meant to be used and having it save a life. That's the goal.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're right. As the kits, evolve and you learn more about the needs. And, I know you're not a Montana woman, right? But I was so excited about interviewing you because I think it's something to really definitely get in the back of Montana women's minds, especially 100%. Since we are, there are hunting groups specific for women. There are adventure groups specific for women. I love the fact that you had mentioned that as a Montana woman, a lot of us go hiking on trails at night. And you did make a comment that the predators are not necessarily animals.
They're not. The scariest predator is human.
Is a human being.
A lot of what we see is human on human behavior leading
Correct.
To the ER.
Right. But
perhaps, talking about like recent news, just take a quick look. There was a woman who was climbing a mountain with her partner in Austria. I was pulling up before this interview to just kind of look at, hey, is there anything that could be more specific to women than men, other than asking my wife and taking a look and seeing like what some of the data shows. But all of a sudden popped up from a couple weeks ago, a woman, her boyfriend, fiance, whatever, was a mountaineer, and they were climbing up a mountain, and she was starting to get really cold, and he just kept going and told her to hang tight, and she died of hypothermia right on the side of the mountain. Yep. Yeah. Yep. So just, I think the important thing is, as a woman, even for children who are out, it's important that you have something yourself so that you can be somewhat self-sufficient and do not be reliant on anybody else in that regard, because in that circumstance, absolute tragedy, that I'm sure all the details will come out, but it exemplifies the need for each person to have their own either kit and knowledge, and just to be able to help the other person or themselves, that
Beautiful.
sad
Beautiful.
Case, but a case in point.
I mean, I think that you answered my next 3 questions, but I'm going to go ahead and say it just to make sure we reiterate what you just have said.
Yes.
What is the one message you want every Montanan or people to hear today about wilderness safety or preparation?
I think being prepared means that you've done some research, you know what you're getting yourself into, and whatever tools you deem necessary to have, ask people who are professionals and know how to use them. It's great to have great gear. Everybody's guilty of buying the best and the finest stuff, but if you don't know how to use it, you might as well not have it.
Correct. I love that. My next question is, what would you say to someone who believes that it won't happen to me?
That's every person I see in the emergency department every day.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it's not my time for a heart attack. Today it is, so it's not my time to get hit by a car. Today it is. I think the key point here is a lot of bad things happen to a lot of very good people, and a lot of bad things happen to people when they least expect it. And so, you can live your life and you exercise and you take care of yourself and you're in great shape. So because of all of those things, I don't need extra hydration on this long run, or because I'm in such great shape and I've done it so much and it's in my backyard, I don't need to be prepared with a splint, or I don't need wound clot or something like that. I think we all get complacent on the things we do all the time. And I can admit I'm guilty of it myself. We all do it. We're caught off guard with things. But the fact of the matter is, bad things do happen. To remain ignorant to the fact that they occur in a way, I think is just some denial. It's an unfortunate part of life. And it's one that I bear witness to on a daily basis in the emergency department. Most of the people who are in there never woke up that day thinking they were going to end up in the emergency department. And I would say most of the people who don't survive never thought that was their day, And so it's a sad fact, but even listening to this podcast and thinking about it yourself, getting yourself in the mindset of preparation, you could already be a step ahead of the person who ends up like that.
You just wrapped up my last question.
What was it?
You're amazing. I mean, you truly are amazing. And I'm so grateful for this conversation. And I think a lot of the listeners will take something. I mean, there's so many great things to take away from it. But I think at the heart and the soul of it is, don't be a liability to yourself and to others, and be freaking prepared. Educate yourself.
Yes.
And where can they go to learn a little bit more about PrepEM Wild?
PrepEMWild.com. You'll see our faces.
Is that where they go to buy the kits as well?
On the website. It gives a little information about our background, which I kind of just gave you here, and you can see the kits that we have, our mantra, what we're all about. And like I said before, take a look at the website. If there's something that you like, but you wish that it was a little bit different, we're available. We are going to answer your email. Send us a message. I'm always interested in hearing what the stories are from the people who are using these. because we have one perspective and there are so many other ones. And, and the Montana woman is a very unique perspective, but one that really does require a much higher level of preparation than some others, specifically based on the weather, as you mentioned, the terrain, the predators, human and animal alike, So yeah, it's been fun thus far, and we're just getting started. So I can only imagine how much more fun it's going to get. But I'm extremely eager to hear the questions for your listeners, anyone who's hearing this, what you might have for me, what you might have for my business partner, Mike. Our goal is to get us both on another one of these so you can meet him as well. He is a very cool guy, and we get along really well, and that's what makes this whole thing so much fun.
Oh, we missed Dr. Mike in this call.
We did. It's okay. We'll get him back.
We'll do another one.
We shall. Love
Well,
it.
thank you so much, and stay tuned for our next episode.
A special thank you to our podcast guest. If you like what you heard, please hit subscribe. You will be notified of future podcast guests. Follow us on our social media platforms and stay tuned for our next podcast chat with an amazing Montana woman.